Thank you, Mr President. I seek leave to make a brief explanation before addressing a question without notice to the Attorney-General on the topic of the right to protest.
Is leave granted? Leave is granted.
Thank you, Mr President. There are many examples in our history where civil disobedience has led to significant positive social change. For instance, the global suffragette movement ran numerous campaigns which involved women chaining themselves to railings, large-scale marches and public demonstrations. And it is widely accepted that without the women's suffragette movement, we would not have women in our parliaments today. In 1955, both Claudette Colvin and Rosa Parks famously refused to give up their bus seats to a white man in an act of civil disobedience. These events sparked the Montgomery bus boycott led by Martin Luther King and resulted in the prohibition of racial segregation on public buses in Montgomery. In the 1950s, Nelson Mandela initiated several protests against apartheid. Attended by tens of thousands of people, these events built the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. In 1969, the Stonewall riots in New York were a series of spontaneous protests by members of the gay community in response to a police raid. 1 year later, on the anniversary of this event, the first gay pride marches took place in Chicago, Los Angeles, New York and San Francisco, where gay pride events now take place across the world. Closer to home, the Aboriginal Tent Embassy in Canberra was first established in 1972 to call on the federal government to give that group land rights and cultural protections. While the original Tent Embassy was formally evicted under laws designed to prohibit it, the ACT Supreme Court later ruled out against using those laws to prohibit the embassy. In 1982, the blockade of the Franklin Dam, led by former Greens leader Bob Brown, resulted in the Hawke government moving to save precious wilderness in Tasmania. And in Adelaide, on the 16th of February back in 2003, 100,000 people marched on our streets against the war on Iraq. This morning on ABC Radio, the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition foreshadowed their intention to move to increase fines and introduce imprisonment for protesters who cause community disruption and obstruction of the public space. My question to the Attorney-General, therefore, is, does the Attorney-General support the right to protest in our state, and can he guarantee that if these historic figures engaged in this conduct today, would they be subject to fines and imprisonment under Labor's anti-protest laws?
Call the Attorney-General.
I thank the honourable member for his question, and I note the honourable member's interest in this area, and the leadership the honourable member has taken in many areas of public debate. Sir, we have introduced legislation that has now passed the lower house in relation to increasing the fines available to courts for breaching Section 58 of the Summary Offences Act. The intention of these changes isn't to increase the scope of these laws, that is, to capture more people whose behaviour could be caught by Section 58, which has been in place, I think, since 1990-ish, and the last time was the penalty was updated, I understand, was 1998. What the changes to the law do seek to do, however, is significantly increase the penalties that the courts can impose for conduct. Certainly, in the last few days, I think is the first time that I've had members of the public stop me and want to talk to me about the problems that they've seen and the disruption that has been caused from protests to them over recent days. One thing I would absolutely hate to see is protests that block thoroughfares that actually end up causing harm to a person. For example, if an emergency services vehicle wanted to get to a hospital. We are increasing the fines that are available to courts for people who breach a law that has been in the Summary Offences Act, as I've said, sir, since 1990. As I say, if someone's behaviour hasn't been caught by this before, it is not the intention of these changes to broaden it, to encapture it, but certainly to give the courts more discretion in the fines that they impose. I note that other states, I think both in recent times, New South Wales, if I remember correctly, also Victoria, have significantly increased their fines for similar things that have included much longer jail terms. And I also note that the fines that are in place now, and the fines that will be in place should these changes go through will be maximum penalties. They won't be the penalties that apply for any sorts of breaches of these. They will be the maximum penalties. And so, maximum penalties are often imposed for the most egregious breaches of the kind. Sometimes you find rarely that the actual maximum penalty is imposed, but is reserved for that theoretical worst sort of breaches of these fines. So I do completely understand the honourable member's question. I know, and I do completely appreciate the significant wins that have been made in civil rights in a whole range of other areas in society by those who have protested. And, sir, I've taken part in protests, in rallies, in demonstrations in the past, and I suspect I'll continue to do in the future, sir. When things can lead to such significant public disruption, and I don't think any of us would want to see either emergency services personnel who are attending these protests or those who are impeded by this protest have situations where even lives could be put at risk. I don't think would be a desirable outcome. But certainly, I don't want to see things stand in the way of seeing progressive democratic change as we've seen in decades and centuries gone by.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Mr Sims.
Has the minister participated in protests that have involved the obstruction of the public space? And is he concerned that were he to engage in such protests in the future, he would fall foul of Labor's draconian laws?
Attorney.
Thank you, sir, and I thank the honourable member for his question. I don't know that I'm trying to recall everything that I've been a part of over the preceding few decades. I'm not sure that I would have been part of any rally, protest or demonstration that would have seen me fall foul of Section 58 of the Summary Offences Act. Certainly, I have never been arrested, charged with, prosecuted or convicted of a breach of Section 58 of the Summary Offences Act. And given that the change that we're making changes to penalties, I'm not sure I will. I know that many protests that are organised by various groups today often go through local councils to seek approval of the protest. Many protests or rallies or demonstrations have a police presence because there's been that approved process through local councils gone through, and are quite successful in winning over hearts and minds in that sort of way. And so rallies like the marches during NAIDOC week, those sorts of rallies do block off King William Street, and approvals are sought from Adelaide City Council. We've seen rallies on the steps of Parliament House where approval, sir, as I understand it, is sought from Parliament. And these are very effective tools in terms of advocating for changes in our society. And long may they continue, and long may we hear the will of the people through these sorts of protests, and particularly ones that have those sorts of missions and are done in a safe way. But I certainly wouldn't want to see any people's lives or a risk of injury through more extreme forms of protest.
Supplementary question, Honourable Mr Sims.
Is it the minister's view, and is it the view of the Malinauskas government, that only protests that are approved by government are acceptable in our state?
I think there's a whole range of ways people express themselves that will continue to be, they have been done and will continue to be done.
Now, Mr Pengello.
Thank you, Mr President. And would these laws have covered the Black Lives Matter protests during the COVID, when laws were broken? Would that, not that I had any objection to it?
I think the honourable member's question, I am, if I'm remembering correctly, during those protests, there was police presence at those. I might stand corrected, but I think at the time even there was an exemption given by the for those protests at the time by the police commission. But I will double check that. But certainly the intention is not expanding the scope of what has been covered by Section 58 of the Summary Offences Act in the past.
Mr Pengello.
Thank you. Who did the Attorney-General consult before rushing through this legislation? Or was it just merely the Premier and the Opposition Leader listening to bleaters on talkback radio or on online platforms?
I think the honourable member for his question, but as I've said before, yeah, it's not just as characterised by the honourable member. This is the first time that I've been stopped by members of the public, as I've in the city, as I've gone about my business, to talk about their concerns about protests and the dangers that might be involved for others. So no, it is. This certainly for me, and I suspect it has been for other members, a very significant area of community concern.
Supplementary
Thank
question.
you. Notwithstanding the response of the attorney, is he aware of concerns raised about unintended consequences of this proposal by very senior and eminent legal commentators in recent hours?
Attorney.
No, sir, I am not aware of what the honourable member is being referring to, but when this bill finds its way to this chamber, I'm sure that the honourable member will agitate those, I have no doubt.
Arising from the original answer.
Question, because I suspect we will be debating this bill in this place. Order, 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 order. The Honourable Mr Sims, I'll listen to your supplementary question.
Is the Minister concerned about the potential for workers, particularly in the public service, to be captured under these new laws should they engage in protest and industrial action? Particularly, I'm thinking of those in the transport space.
Attorney.
Look, I think the honourable member for his question, and it's not an unreasonable question, but as I've said, this doesn't intend to increase the scope. So it certainly and absolutely and unapologetically does intend to increase the range of fines that a court can impose, but that's not what it intends to do to extend that scope in relation to something that people have been doing before. But similarly, I know people are concerned that public sector workers, particularly those in the emergency services, occasionally put themselves at risk with the actions of some protests.